Hello there. Before you venture into this week's episode, just a reminder that this episode discusses emotional and mental health issues, especially suicide attempts, from a personal experience, and this may be difficult for some listeners. So, trigger warning. Hi there. Welcome to the 𝗪𝗶𝗶𝘆𝗹. This is a podcast for Blacks, Asians, and those who love them. I am Mo, and I am your host, ready to spark your curiosity as I take you on this adventurous ride of exploring cultures through the stories of my guests from all over the world. On this show, we get really personal, discussing salient issues that are relevant to our contemporary age and also building community around them. As our guests exercise courage and vulnerability in sharing their life's experiences, we hope that in turn you are inspired by them and that you get the courage needed to set your own stories free. Enjoy the ride, and thank you so much for listening.
So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the 𝗪𝗶𝗶𝗆. This is me, 𝗪𝗶𝗍𝗃, and
Mo.
And we have with us Jessica Puri. She's our guest for today. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, 𝗪𝗶𝗍𝗃. Hi, Mo.
Hi, Jessica.
So Jessica was she's with us to talk about a very important subject, which we'll get into in a bit. But a little bit about Jessica. She was born in Nigeria. So yes, people, we have a fellow Nigerian in the house.
Like both of us are not enough for the whole Nigeria.
Yeah, we're really everywhere. Nigeria's
We're a proud lot, huh?
Very proud.
So she was born across the country from us, though.
Yeah.
Which is
We'll
interesting.
take it.
So Tolani and I both grew up in the southern part of the country. Jessica grew up in the north.
Yeah.
And
basically, if you guys couldn't speak English, you wouldn't be able to communicate.
Exactly.
No.
That's how.
Thanks to those colonial masters.
Amen.
And you're working for them, 𝗪𝗶𝗍𝗃, so you shouldn't be talking. You've gone back to the plantation, 𝗪𝗶𝗍𝗃. But good thing you're taking their money away from them. This is the kind of news we want to keep hearing.
It's the least you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, everybody has to play their parts. So yeah, Jessica is currently based in the US with Tolani, not with Tolani per se, in a different part of the States. She's currently in, actually, do you know, I'm not sure, is that Chicago?
Yes,
Chicago,
yeah.
yes.
Right.
Illinois.
Okay. So yeah, she's currently in Chicago. She has a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from Loyola and a master's in public health from DePaul. And then she's currently doing a...
Yes, you know.
That's their mascot.
Blue Devils. The Nigerian in me is like Harry Potter.
Wait till you start doing the rock star sign for you to Austin and they think you're part of a demonic cult.
Exactly.
We digress, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, it's fine. Sorry,
Yeah,
go on.
one of many digressions.
This is
to
a
come.
fun introduction. This is the longest introduction we've had on the show. And I'm so for it.
Because you people keep getting in my way.
It's so funny.
Especially you, Tolani.
Sorry, I keep my mouth shut now.
All right. She's currently a doctoral candidate, famous last words. She's currently a doctoral candidate in the social sciences and health track at Feinberg School of Medicine, Northwestern University, and she teaches a course on field studies in public health, also at Northwestern University. She has done research in HIV, female genital cutting, physician, cultural competence, and health equity in Chicago. And she's interested in health equity, promotion, health behavior theory, which is, I must say, dear to my heart, that last one,
Really?
and global health.
Shrink.
Yep, I claim it. So yeah, welcome. Thank you for joining us, Jessica. Thanks for making the time to be here with us and for looking as excited as you seem to be.
I always am. This is a very heavy topic.
We need
so
the laughs,
the lighter you
yeah,
can start, the better. Plus, I am very passionate about it anyway. So, according to my husband, I just talk with my hands. I'm looking crazy.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, we're going to be talking about a heavy topic, and that's the heavy topic Jessica was just talking about, and that is female genital cutting. But before we get into it, just to sort of get a sense for where you're coming from, Jessica. Just tell us what a typical day is like for you at work.
At work, that's a good question. I'm thankful that there isn't a typical day. So I teach twice a week, Mondays and Tuesdays, for now anyway, evening classes. And then when I'm not teaching, the rest of my time is spent doing research on FGM or presenting on it or working on my dissertation or grading papers or preparing my lectures. So the nice, flexible thing about this time of life is I get to kind of decide what's going to take more of my time and mental capacity that day. So if I have class in the evening, more of my mental capacity is going to preparing for that class, looking at discussion posts and preparing very current stuff for my students. And then when I'm not teaching that evening, everything else is going into FGM work.
All right. So basically, well, it sounds like a pretty regular sort of, university
academic
lecturer
job, yeah.
kind of day, academic day, yeah. What are the kinds of things that would stand out as unusual for you that pop up from time to time?
You mean in my schedule?
Yeah.
That's a good question. What would be unusual? Maybe something with my health or something, with some friends needing to, like, more personal life stuff. So if a friend needs my help with something, or I don't know, what is unusual? I can't really think of anything unusual.
Okay.
So basically, if I'm not doing FGM stuff or school stuff, I'm doing stuff with my family or my friends.
Okay.
So thankfully, nothing dramatic has had to happen where I've had to drop everything and be gone for a while. But outside of the usual, so school and work, it's just family and friends.
Obviously, you're doing a lot. Not that sounds like a criticism in a good way.
Yeah, I get it.
Like you're someone who clearly has achieved a lot. You're a doctoral candidate. You're a lecturer. You've done a lot of research. You've done all of that, from having moved to the US at a young age, navigating a new culture, a new country.
Yeah.
We're going to. Well, what would you do if I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, given all of that, all this stuff that you've done, which we'll come back to in a bit, but like, one of the things you mentioned in when you were talking to us and we're sort of trying to get to know a bit about you was that you said you're interested, like, faith is a big part of your life.
Yes.
How does that play out in middle of all of this?
Oh, that's a good question. So you have a lot of good questions. I say that I will be saying that often. I'm trying to control that. But so my faith is kind of the reason I do pretty much everything I do. So for instance, with my career, the way I even got into that was from a scripture in Matthew 25:35. So just for anyone listening, when I say faith, I mean Christianity. So I am Christian. Unfortunately, that can mean many different things in the worst way, but I'm a Bible-believing Christian, and so much of my life, it kind of comes out of that, of obeying what I see in scripture. So it was this verse in Matthew 25:35 that says, "For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." And for me, all of that was everything from refugee care to food insecurity to water insecurity to mass incarceration to poverty. Like, all of that was encompassed in that verse. And like, this is public health. This is literally everything that public health is, and how I got set on that path.
Yes.
I am like, if Jesus
way,
came
yeah.
In like 2022, he probably would have practiced public health a little bit. That's like my little theory, but
that is a great way to think about it. I've actually literally never thought about it that way, and I don't think I'm ever going to see that.
Yeah, I had a guest on the show a while back. This was Chinwe. She's a Christian who's very interested in social justice. Now, she talks more about social justice, not public health, because that's her field, because she's a social scientist. And she said exactly what you said. Like, you can't be Christian and not care about, racial issues and injustices and all of that. So
yeah, because Jesus did. He cared about all of that. He came straight to the marginalized, and he came straight to the people that nobody wanted to talk to. In fact, the people that the quote unquote people of God were rejecting were the ones that he came for directly. And so, I guess since moving here, I have tried to redefine what my faith means for me outside of just going to church because my parents wanted me to go, or being quiet. Also, growing up in the North and being a woman, you speak when you're spoken to, and you don't ask the damning questions and things like that. So the freedom that was given to me here was knowing that God is not afraid of my questions. And when I see something that seems like a contradiction, he's a safe space to talk to him. And he'll bring me people who will talk with me about these things. And, so my faith, it has taken its own, I guess, shape. That's the word I'm looking for. It's taken its own form since I've moved here, and kind of been spread out across my personal and professional life. And so that's what keeps me grounded, even when I'm getting a little exhausted or feeling down. Especially with something as heavy as genital cutting, I'm reminded that it's God that brought me this far. It's the Lord that brought this topic to my mind because he wants people to do something for these women. So it is, my faith is my reset button when I start to get exhausted or overwhelmed by the challenges of life, basically.
Wow, that's so beautiful. I can definitely see why you're so passionate about what you do. It's more than just a field of interest. This is your life's calling. Now, I know for a fact that you moved here when you were, I think, 17 or so. You were quite young. And if I recall from a pre-podcast conversation, which was like weeks ago, was you didn't really have you had somebody here, but you had to learn a lot of stuff on your own. And again, a 17-year-old, I moved here in my 20s, right? And it was still quite a brave thing to do because it took a lot to be able to thrive here. For those that might be in the boat right now in their teens coming to the US, and because, being in Nigeria, our parents want to always give their best to their kids. What would you say really helped you really thrive? Because you've achieved quite a lot, and I hope you're very proud of all the things you've been able to do. What are some of the tips for parents and then children alike that can, who might be listening to this, and how can they, thrive in such a very difficult environment, being so young and moving to a different country with or without your family support? Because even if you have family, it's not like being back home. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. That's very sweet. So first of all, I would totally do this again. If I could do it all over again, I would absolutely do it. And just knowing the peace, the fact that the Lord brought me here and had planned everything out, I would absolutely do it. But I guess the advice I would give is on two levels. For kids who are coming, be okay with being alone while you navigate a new space. Like, it's you will make more acquaintances than you will make friends, and so those acquaintances will come quickly. Friends don't. So because good friends take their time to make their way to you. Like, if it's going to be long lasting and effective, it's worth it taking the time to get there. So just be very aware that there will be times that you're alone because people around you won't necessarily understand you, and it's fine if they're acquaintances first before they're friends. For parents, I mean, your child is doing the bravest thing they can do for their future. So trust that you've done the work that you need to do and release them to be adults. Because as they grow into their adulthood, there are just new things they're going to learn, and new things to learn about themselves that will not look like your culture, and they won't look like the things that you planned for them. But you need to trust and let go. And trust that in the letting go, they will always be yours. Because the tighter you hold on to them, the more you squeeze, and the faster you lose them. So release, let go, trust that you've done the work, and they'll always be your kids.
African mothers just left that stat. It's funny how you said the same thing that one of our podcast guests. I don't know if her episode is going to come out before or after yours. Or Mita said exactly the same thing. about when
I was thinking just
right, about trusting them. They're going to sound differently. They're going to think differently because they're in a new world that, they're navigating. And I love how you just talked about tighter you hold on to them, the more difficult it gets. And I can imagine for parents, that can be quite hard to do.
It is hard. I'm not a parent, but I imagine that it is one of the hardest things to do because you're walking around with your heart outside your body, just having this child, so it is a lot. It's a lot, but it's in the long run the safest thing you can do because you need to be a safe space somewhere they can come back to, and still feel at home. But also they're navigating a world that you don't know, so you don't really know how to guide them, in the day to day, and they're surviving so much that they probably will never share with you. So. Just trusting that. But yes, that is a very, especially coming from a young person that is not a mother, that is a difficult thing.
No, but your perspective is unique because, you came here when you were in your teens and quite honestly, your brain isn't fully developed. You could have been easily distracted. So you do have merit to what you're saying because you have lived a life, and we're going to take that with the grains of salt in this world. Actually, oodles of salt. My next question was going to be around depression. So even though I moved here in my 20s, there were moments of deep depression in the US and it was so hard to talk to people at home, like back home about it. Cause it's like, what are you depressed about? You're here for your PhD. You have this great opportunity. But I think because of the way the environment is so different from how we grew up, it was quite isolating. And I'm not introverted by any, standards. I guess my question for you would be, what advice would you give? What has been your experience first dealing with mental health issues, especially, navigating a new whole world when you were quite younger? And what role again has your faith played, or even other resources that you use to rise above those issues?
Yeah. So unfortunately, my experience with depression did not start when I came here. It was, so this is something I've become more comfortable sharing in the last 2 years. But I attempted to take my life when I was about 8, which is very young. And at the time I didn't have the vocabulary to know what it was suicide, but I attempted hanging and it didn't work. And I was like, well, I can't even get that right, went ahead with my day. But it was that feeling of not being enough, not making my parents proud. It was perceived pressure that wasn't necessarily real. My parents absolutely loved me. There was some pressure. I'm the oldest child, so there was some perceived pressure, things I felt like I should be carrying that they weren't expecting me to carry. But there also isn't a culture. It is starting to come up now, but back then in the 90s in Nigeria, there was no culture of talking about your feelings or the pressure that you feel like you're experiencing from your family, because also they are victims of their own experiences and they've carried a lot too. So just the stigma around that didn't allow me to grow to fully understand the weight of what I almost did at age 8, which that was pre-puberty. So I every time I tried to explain it in my head, I'm like, that wasn't hormones. No. That wasn't puberty. But that was messed up. But seeing where I am now and knowing what I know, I am so thankful that attempt was unsuccessful and that I can actually talk about it. And talk about the fact that if I could experience that, there are many, many, many more Nigerians that are experiencing it and stifling it. So Absolutely. My advice, you are not alone. You are absolutely not alone. And part of the reason that it continues is there's shame in it. But shame is the weapon that is supposed to keep you from talking about this experience, right? So one, acknowledging that you're not alone and breaking, choosing to break that stigma and seeking help. Because the moment you start to talk about it and the moment you start to seek help, you realize that there are many more who have experienced it. You find more sympathy, you find a community of people, and then also get professional help. One of the things that I am learning a lot is God gave us minds to interact with Him while we interact with our environment. So with a broken world, we need to care for our minds with as much intensity as we care for other organs. Like you would go to a cardiologist if you had heart palpitations, or a urologist if you had kidney stones. Why isn't it as natural to go to a therapist if your brain is broken? So just kind of approaching every body part with that intensity because God wills it. He has provided those resources for us to use our free will to look for in a broken world. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. I mean, and I was kind of a little bit, I didn't see that coming about the hanging at 8, and I want to appreciate just your vulnerability in sharing that. I imagine it's not something you know, talk about a lot, but thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm becoming a little more comfortable because I have to take my own advice, right? I'm completely fine. I'm absolutely fine that it was a one-time attempt and other thoughts have not been as intense as that one. But if I'm telling people to talk about it in 𝗪𝗀𝗃, then I have to be better about talking about my experience, right?
Yeah, well, even then, I mean, I hear that, but I think it's also worth just acknowledging that it is not easy to do, and we do not take it for granted that you are that you're willing to share that with us and with people.
Thank you. That's great.
But yeah, I mean, you've said, wow, you've dropped a lot of bombs today. First of all, I have to say that.
I agree. The good kind of bombs. We want this kind of bomb. This kind of bombs we want.
See, I keep using these words that can have double meanings, don't I? But like, no, I mean, like, you've said some really sort of, you know, powerful things. I love what you said earlier about good friends take their time to make their way to you. But then just now, you know, when you were talking about the whole, you know, your whole experience with mental health, and I'm sure you're aware of this by now, but like the fact that immigration and moving countries is a massive factor that affects people's mental health negatively. The isolation, there's even stuff like something as severe as schizophrenia is higher in people who have moved countries. You know, so you then get to things like depression and all of that.
Or even income inequality, because you're moving usually from a place that is developing to a place that is developed.
Exactly.
Naira is not dollars.
Apart from that, something we don't often think about is sometimes people are even moving from a higher social status
where they are
to a lower social status when they move to.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Like in the developing countries, they were still higher social status. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then you come here and you're lower social status.
Do you know who I am?
and your lower social status people that would have been lower social status to you where you were from.
This life is not balanced.
Do you know what I mean?
That's literally like sometimes when I go back home, I'm like, why am I going back to the US? Like,
I'm a Nigerian princess here, for real.
Literally, like, why? Why
you become a black person? That's all you are. You're black.
I know someone who, you know, came here like had a driver, had domestic staff and everything, and like you come to the UK, you're doing everything yourself. You know, it's like you're living that life, you know, and it's so there's so many factors, and of course, but I think the major one is the isolation and the you know, the fact that people here find it isolating. Then imagine for us coming from communal people that grow up here are finding it isolating, and there's a lot of loneliness. How much more? You know, for those of us coming from places where
your neighbor that is always into your business.
You'll
be missing your neighbor that is always into your business. It's like, I would kill to have a neighbor. I would kill to have that kind of neighbor right now. Like, can I just see my neighbor and let them ask me, have I eaten or how am I doing today?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a massive thing, and obviously, you know, that's what you went through. So thank you so much for sharing. Just I think would like, if you don't have to answer this now, but would like to have you back and talk a bit more in depth about, you know, just that whole aspect of like the mental health aspect of things. But we need to talk about the main sort of issue that we sort of, you know, have on the table that we've been dancing around a little bit.
It gets heavier, guys. It gets heavier.
but it is related to mental health anyway, at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yes.
And I guess maybe let's start with what drives what got you interested in FGC, and which I think is the preferred name, right? It's female genital cutting and not mutilation. I'm not sure.
It depends.
I know there's been like terminology considerations around it. So maybe we can talk about that later. But I think let's all start with the technical stuff. And let's start with the sort of just how did you get, how did it become something that became so much on your radar? And if there's a story around it that you can share, because it's also a sensitive story. So as much as you're able to share and feel confident to share, please.
Absolutely. So, when I was, this is before age 10, I remember having a friend who, we were in different classes, so same year, but different classes, so we'd only meet during break time in primary school. And so the playground was kind of our common ground to just talk about stuff, right? And so the playground, while other people are figuring out when their turn is on the swing or the merry-go-round, we were talking about heavier things, like how she had just started her period, and that meant she was going to get married. She was about to be a child bride. Obviously we didn't have all that terminology at that age, but we knew this is not something that she wanted. And coming from the family I came from, where both of my parents are Christian, both are educated, they both went to grad school, it wasn't a topic of conversation at home. So I knew this was wrong. I knew something off about it. So I remember going home and telling my parents, look, we have to save this girl.
Oh, the simplicity of childhood.
She has to come live with us. And I'm thinking this is, straightforward. She escapes home. She comes live with us. She grows up like my sister, period. My parents are
no pun intended, period.
Right.
I'm so horrible.
Period.
I'm so horrible.
No, exactly.
Take the mic from me.
That's good. I love a good pun. But, my parents, I remember talking to my mom, actually, and she was like, no, we can't do that. I'm like, what do you mean? I remember thinking my parents were awful people. Like, how do you not let this girl escape and come live with us? And then that's kind of when I started to learn about what Sharia law was and how it is normal for an adult man with multiple wives to pick up another wife and marry her. And, she was basically her family's property. She was not she had a duty to her family, and that had nothing to do with her opinions, her desires, her rights, just as a human being. And that kind of, I didn't realize at the time what I was doing was advocacy, asking questions where is this girl coming from? Are her parents wealthy? Are they educated? The social determinants of health, so the things around her in her social environment that affect her health. And so that together with advocacy is kind of stuck with me as I grew, and I realized how much of an untold story that is. There are people in Nigeria who have never met a child bride, who will never meet one because it's so big and the tribes and the regions are different. But even moving here and realizing even how much more of an untold story that was. And so as I started to look more for the untold stories, I realized there was female genital cutting, which is prevalent in Nigeria as well. I didn't realize growing up that there were girls around me who had experienced it. But even and it's not just an African thing, it's Middle Eastern, it's Asian. There's a presence here in the US, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a bit. And so what was driving me to kind of go more specific was, one, this advocacy for women who are forgotten, and then narrowing it down to the untold stories. Because we have things like human trafficking, we know that's bad. Child brides, we know that's bad. There are people doing work in it. But female genital cutting, FGC, FGM, it's even more niche. There's even less people talking about it. And so that's what's driven me to get there. We can just talk about the terminology now, actually, if you want.
Yeah, please. But also, I'd like to hear more about the bit where you talked about the US aspect of it as well.
Yes.
Let's hear about the terminology.
But wait, before you answer, I think I might be right about this, is that when people say FGC, it's a way to kind of get away with the word mutilation, right? Because we talked about that nicking and all that. But let me know what you think. Let's know what you think.
Yeah. So it depends. So there are women who have experienced this, who believe that it is an appropriate rite of passage. And so if you're trying to serve them and you're trying to address something that is an effect of this experience, of that genital cutting, you can't insult their tradition and expect them to be open to the help that you have to offer. So in some spaces, if you want them to feel safe and to actually communicate with you, you refer to it as cutting as opposed to mutilation. Mutilation is It's more for that wow factor, right? Because it is not. It is mutilation. It is a violence against the female body. So it is right to say that it's mutilation. So in certain spaces, when you want to draw attention to how violent and intrusive the process is, mutilation is the appropriate term. So you'd say FGM. So in most of my papers, I write FGM because I know what my target audience is. But in a conversation where I'm talking to someone who I want to provide care for, I'd rather say cutting. So FGC, FGM. What I don't say though is female circumcision, because it's not the same thing. It kind of assumes
it makes a false equivalence.
It equates, yes, thank you, that's the word. It equates it to male circumcision. With male circumcision, you're just taking off the prepuce or the hood. The penis still works the same way. In fact, there's studies to show that you have reduced rates of HIV, or it could actually be healthier for the male when you cut off the penis. With female genital cutting, there's absolutely no health benefits at all. So the equivalent of it with the actual process, the equivalent version of it in the male would be cutting the penis off completely and maybe leaving the balls. The balls. Maybe. Even then, maybe nicking it a little bit.
The world will end if men had to go through that. They will abolish everything. Even female genital mutilation will be abolished. Because they don't play with that area, you know that. And I work in prostate cancer, so I know exactly what I'm talking about.
You just know, right? Yeah, so...
Yeah, but that is helpful.
The terminologies,
just understanding the thinking behind when you choose to use which term.
Mm-hmm.
And then you said something earlier about the fact that, this is not just something that, because when people hear things like FGC and FGM, they think about it like, oh, it's those
barbaric
poor
countries.
Oh, we feel so sorry for them. Or, the poor masses. But apparently this is also happening in places like the US. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so... And the UK. So I have more stats for the US. But in the US in the 1930s and 40s, the face of FGM was actually Caucasian and African American. What happened was so even earlier than that, people like Marion J. Sims, who is considered the father of modern gynecology, we could do a whole other episode.
That guy's a hot mess. We need to throw him away. Like,
the atrocity.
Yeah, if someone needs to be cancelled, it's that man. Sorry, Amide. Yeah, look, I don't cancel people, but I've cancelled him.
Oh no! I totally know what you're talking about, and I'm aware of some of the
some gynecologist schools.
The terrible history around him.
Right, but so people like him advocated for FGM as a cure to things like nymphomania and lesbianism and masturbation, basically preserving femininity. Right, and then a few years later, you have people like Sigmund Freud, who's the father of
presenting their version of femininity.
Their version of femininity, which we know back then it was a very one line, like this is exactly what femininity is. Period. I also realizing I say period a lot. Some years later, you have you have Sigmund Freud, the father of Freudian thought, who, thank goodness, a lot of his thoughts have been debunked, or his practice have been debunked. But he also was one of the people that really advocated for genital cutting as a cure to these quote unquote, the masturbation, the nymphomania, lesbianism. We need to take care of all of it by doing some mutilation to genitals, maybe nicking the clitoris a little bit or shaving it, whatever form it is that they had at the time. So even the American College of Gynecology and Obstetrics agreed with that practice. So it actually didn't become illegal in the United States until 1996. That was yesterday. Side note. In Canada, it was 97. Wow. So maybe
Nigeria is probably going to be 2059. God help us.
Yes. So, which is absolutely insane. All of us on this call were alive in 96 when it became illegal in the United States. So
I'm going to need time to recover from this information.
The face of genital cutting was different. Today, it is immigrants. So people who have moved to the U.S. or to these Western countries from places where it's still legal, or even if it's illegal, it's still celebrated as a cultural rite of passage, and like a sign of marriageability. But yes, there are still cases today in the U.S. In fact, about a little over 500,000 women in the U.S. right now are still at risk of experiencing this. Half a million, 500,000, over 500,000.
Even though you say it's illegal, Jessica, I want to push back a little bit on that. Even though it's illegal, but it still happens a lot, and especially in healthcare settings.
Yeah, yes, it definitely does. So, maybe we'll talk about this later, or maybe we can talk about this now. But there's a different form of FGM called re-infibulation. So there are 4 types. I'll go over the 4 types a little later, but with re-infibulation, you're basically redoing a procedure. So if a woman experiences it, so she's been cut and stitched and, completely closed, and she gives birth, she inevitably undoes her stitches. And so in some hospitals that serve a lot of immigrant populations, one I'm thinking about actually is in Minnesota, they ask the doctors to re-stitch them, so to re-infibulate. And so that's another way that we're seeing FGM still be present in the United States. And then you have some ethical issues there where the doctors may or may not know that this is illegal in the United States, but the desire is to, respect this patient's culture, even though this is a new experience for them. So yes, it is still present in the United States, sometimes in the form of re-infibulation, sometimes in the form of actually doing the cutting for young girls in clinics or even at home.
So I'm aware, sort of just still talking about this in the US. I'm aware that, and this is something I just learned, that last September there was an incident of a judge throwing out the first FGM case in the country.
Federal case.
Yes, the first federal
that we know of.
Federal.
Yeah. So, do you want to give us a bit of background about, how do you feel? How do you think about what happened, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I enjoy a good name call, naming what happened.
Call them out.
So this Judge Bernard Frye. Let's call it what it is. So basically, the judge was saying, as despicable as this practice may be, and I'm just going to pick the direct quote because I've seen this so many times. As despicable as this practice may be, Congress did not have the authority to pass the federal law. So at the time, this is a 22-year-old law at this point. So he was saying Congress did not have the authority to pass this law that criminalizes FGM, and it's for the states to regulate. Which is a giant loophole. And so he also goes on to say federalism concerns deprive Congress of the power to enact this statute, and that Congress overstepped its bounds by legislating to prohibit FGM. And it's that FGM is a local criminal activity, which, in keeping with longstanding tradition in our federal system of government, is for the states to regulate and not Congress. So he wasn't disagreeing that there are victims in this, that this is a violation of human rights. He was saying that the loophole here is it's in the wrong court. Basically.
So basically, it was pulling a pilot, it sounds like.
Maybe a civil court, but then where else would it have gone? Because federal will help, to enact it into laws and whatnot, right? So, yeah.
Well, so as of 2022, only 40 states in the country actually have laws regarding FGM.
For reference, we have 50 states in the U.S. minus the, insular ones. Yeah.
Right. And in those 40 states, the laws are not uniform.
They're not consistent.
They vary. So in a couple of states, as a parent or a guardian who has your child go out of the country back to their home country to experience this and come right back, you may not face any consequence. In some other states, you would. Or if you are the person doing the cutting yourself, you might face some consequences in some states, and you won't in some others. So that ruling was definitely a blow for advocates, for people who have been working with survivors and looking to end this. It was a blow, but it was not the final blow. There's still a lot of work being done The fact that we're even at 40 states is progress, because there was a time when it was not the case at all. But there are people doing good work, so I am hopeful. The optimist in me will win, as discouraged as it tends to be sometimes. It will win.
Wow. And I think sometimes it's humbling that even great countries like the US might not always get it right. And I dare to think that the reason why we don't really hear so much about it is, like you rightly said, the face of FGC or FGM has switched from being, white to being more of the immigrant population, and who's going to fight for them, right? I have watched a video, and I couldn't watch it to the end. It was a YouTube documentary of someone being cut, and there was this pomp and unnecessary pageantry around just the act. You could see the women folks coming together. I hardly saw any man in the picture, but it was a celebration. Yeah. But the only person that wasn't really laughing was the person who was going to be, cut, as it were. And so my question for you would be this. Given that we now know, and studies have shown this, you don't have to even read the academic literatures to be able to know that this is a horrible act, especially when you listen to just one victim talk about, their experiences, especially long-term implications. Why do you think it's driven by women? Even though at the end of the day, the only reason I've been able to hear about FGM is you're trying to curb, sexual promiscuity, which again goes back to the patriarchy. It's about diminishing the pleasure and order of a woman to be able to play. Why do you think women are the ones really driving this? Because I think this act would have been, barred a long time ago if women stopped actually, partaking in it.
It's a great question. So I think about it. One, who are you doing it for, right? So in a lot of societies, so let's pick Sudan for instance. The idea of marriageability is extremely important. So I, as a Nigerian, I'm fully aware of that. We have only daughters in my family, and we have constantly heard how important it is for us to be marriageable. Doing the cooking, like the cleaning, you must learn how to do these things, otherwise nobody will marry you, which is a whole other conversation. But that idea of marriageability, FGM is a big part of that. And so for a mother who wants to make her daughter, who wants her daughter to be the best possible version of herself, and like the mother has grown up in this tradition where this is one of those things, and well, women are strong anyway, so we can do it. I experienced it, your grandmother experienced it. You'll be marriageable, you will not bring shame to our family. There's that, right? That's one part of it. There are some cultures where they genuinely believe that this is healthier for the female child, and that's where illiteracy comes in, and education will show that it definitely isn't. It is actually much worse. So you have marriageability, you have health, you have people just trying to go along with tradition. And so that's where the conversation of medicalized FGM comes in. So mothers would take their children to doctors, believing that the doctors will not want to cause any harm, so they'll find a safer way to do this for their child. So unfortunately, a lot of the pressure is put on women to make their daughters into, the perfect specimen to show, like, you are... my value in this society has been, what's that word I'm looking for? Has been established because I've done my job to get.
There's a price set on it.
Yeah. Exactly. And so, however, I will say in some parts of the world, so actually in Yoruba culture in Nigeria, the people who practice FGM, it's both the mother and father, and most of the time it is the father that makes that decision, and the mother goes ahead with it. So, it's not. While a lot of the pressure has been placed on the mother, in many societies, the father is the one that decides that this is what the daughter will experience, and his word is law.
I mean, I think this is also a good segue into our next question about survivor story. And by the way, Jessica, I want to thank you so much for speaking to that, my friend. And she still keeps talking about how you've really helped her to be able to talk about and share some things, because it was her dad's side of the family that actually give the mandate, and her mom just effected what was put into place. And again, I think it still goes back to it being patriarchy led. So let's talk about a survivor story. Because again, a part of me still goes like, why they keep still doing this thing at the expense of people who they're still living with this. If you will hardly die from it, right? Mortality rates are low, but then thinking about the complications, the long-term complications, I'm going to give examples, like real life examples, because that friend of ours, she sent me a voice note and she listed some of the things she's still struggling with. I guess my question would be, which of a survivor story has stuck with you that you say you'd like to share, maybe for those that might be on the fence about this issue, thinking we don't have an idea what we're talking about?
Yeah. So the one that sticks with me the most is a young girl from East Africa. I believe it was either Ethiopia or Djibouti, but one of those two, because they're so close to each other. So she experienced it as a child. I think she actually remembered the experience. I don't remember that part, but the part of the story that stuck with me is she had a backlog of blood, menstrual blood, because of complications with FGM. And so her abdomen was swelling over time. Now, what was a taboo in her community at the time was getting pregnant out of wedlock.
No.
So she's at home, seemingly a virgin to her family, and all of a sudden her abdomen is swelling and she looks pregnant. And so, obviously the family is feeling ashamed of her, and it's a whole thing. She's about to be ostracized from the family, and they're like, well, let's go to the hospital and just might as well get the actual result from the doctor that you are pregnant. It turns out she wasn't pregnant. It was a backlog of menstrual blood in her abdomen. That of all the stories, that one has stuck with me the most, because there are many complications that come in FGM. We'll gladly share them in a little bit, but I don't know. That one was just really heavy because she was about to be ostracized from her family and from her society, and there's no one was going to believe her, to believe that she hadn't slept with anyone yet, and she definitely was not pregnant, but her body was betraying her, basically, and showing something else, which had its own truth. Her body was showing that, like, look, I am traumatized from this FGM experience, and so her voice didn't matter. Her advocating for herself didn't go anywhere with her family, and if they didn't test for pregnancy, that she would have been ostracized.
So she was basically caught between, like, she was damned if she did and damned if she didn't, basically.
Exactly. I was going to say double victimization. You guys did this to her, and then the blowback was you're about ostracizing her. She's even lucky you could have beheaded her in some communities for bringing shame to the family name.
Exactly. Right.
So, if I suppose if someone wants to learn more, where can they go? If someone wants to learn more, or if they know someone or want help for themselves, where can they go? I suppose your answers will probably be US based, but if you have anything for international listeners as well.
Yes, I do. So I'm part of a network called the US End FGM Network, but it's beyond the US. A lot of the members are from organizations in Kenya, in Nigeria, and some African countries, some Middle Eastern countries as well. People who are doing good work in advocating for survivors, advocating for women who are looking for asylum in new countries because they're running away from this experience. So literally, if you Google US and FGM Network and look at their list of members, you'll find members that are from different parts of the world.
What's the web?
So actually, a little more on that, actually. So yeah, for the US end, it's a kind of a collaborative group of 150 survivors, civil society organizations, foundations, activists, policymakers, researchers, healthcare providers, people that are committed to ending the process. So if you're looking for clinical care, or you're looking for academic level work, or you're looking for legal work, whatever it is, whatever aspect of FGM advocacy you're looking for, you'll find it through that network. And I'm just really proud to be a member of there. I'm a very small part, but so I'm an individual member, but there are agencies that are members.
Is there? I'm sure there's a website. I was gonna ask you a silly question. Is there a website, which I'm not gonna ask because there is one clearly. I have not asked it. So what's the website? So we can put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so the website, I usually tell people just Google US
cool.
and FGM
we'll find
network,
it
and the first link pops up is the website.
And then you can find whichever one for your country.
Great, okay.
There as well, yeah? Cool. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I suppose just, so we don't end on this note, because obviously it is a very important thing, but I suppose what would you say to someone who has had or undergone FGM or knows someone that's undergoing FGM and either is struggling with it, the trauma of it, or is feeling at a loss to help the person that they know that's struggling with it? What would you say to those two? That's two different people, obviously, that I've described. What would you say to each of them?
So if you have experienced it, your story is worth telling. Whether you remember experiencing it or not, your story is absolutely worth telling. One of my favorite organizations that does work with storytelling and survivors is called 𝗪𝗂𝘂. They're one of the networks, or they're under the network that I mentioned earlier, and they focus on storytelling and empowering the survivor to take control of that experience, but also know that there's so much more than that. So one, you are not alone, but also your story is phenomenal. You are a survivor. You literally lived through a traumatic experience that people have died from, and so we want to hear your story. We want you to write it down. We want you to talk with people. There's help for you available. I'm spending the rest of my life working on the help that you will need. But also there's medical help, but there's also social help. And through the network you can find that help too. But you can also always reach out to me. And for the person who knows someone that's struggling with it, one, make sure you know the cultural implications of that practice. So where is this person this person who is in your life, where are they from? What does it mean that they've experienced this or they're about to experience it? What are the implications if they don't experience it? What are ways that you can support them, whether it's just by listening or being a part of asylum seeking for them? But make sure that you fully understand their story and understand where they're coming from before you start suggesting, especially if you are maybe living in a privileged space, if you're living in the West, before you throw
don't jump in and be a savior.
Exactly.
White Barbie. Don't be a white Barbie. Just listen and understand to comprehend.
Exactly. Make sure you fully, as much as you can within your capacity, understand the implications of their experience before you start to tell them what you think they're supposed to do. And if they eventually go through with it, make sure you are just there to be a listening ear and to find the help that they need. Because when it comes to their mental health, their physical health, they're going to need help outside of their family and outside of their community. So just be there as that person.
Wow. I love what you said about just the...
Thank you so much for that.
With the cultural context. I love what you talked about, the cultural context. And even as a Nigerian, there's some cultural context I wouldn't understand. So don't take it for a face value, because that person's Nigerian. No. Really make sure you understand the local context before diving in. And I think it would be nice to wrap up this session by just, sharing a survival story. Because three of us on this conversation, especially you, Jessica, you're very passionate about this topic, but we don't have any first-hand experience. And for me, in talking to my friend who I introduced you to, and she's not even yet able to totally put into words what she experienced. So background story to the listeners would be, she was in her 20s just hanging out with a bunch of friends who were guys, and and they asked about her sexual experience, and she goes, no, never had sex. And they're like, how can you never not have had sex? And she's like, no, I just, and they're like, are you sure you're normal? Hope you were not circumcised. And she kind of chuckled, like, circumcised, that's a barbaric act, that couldn't have happened to me. Well, homegirl went home to ask her mom, and her mom said yes, that she was circumcised, and it was a tradition of her people, of her father's people. And so fast forward many years down the line, she eventually gets married. Now, take note that she never had sex before marriage. And that's a very important distinction to make, because I'm going to explain why I'm putting this delineation in the conversation. She got married. Sex was very painful for her. And even as of today, at the time of this recording, according to her, no matter how much her husband tries to like get the foreplay and everything going, it's never quite, as enjoyable. Sometimes she cries through it. And this is, imagine a virgin who saved herself, that can be a thing of pride, right? And then you find that it's not enjoyable. Now, along that conversation, having to go through all of that, I don't know what made her go test. She just went to the hospital one day and they found out that she had pre-cervical cancer, what you would call 𝗪𝗂, which is, cervical intraepithelial neoplasia. This is like caused by HPV, and it might lead to cancer. She has 𝗪𝗂, the second version, which refers to abnormal cells affecting a larger portion, about 1/3 to 2/3 of the epithelium, which is like a lining around her cervix, and that can lead to cancer. And the doctors could only link it to that particular event. So the working assumption is that whatever instrument they used in cutting her infected her. So she's had this infection for the longest time. And if she hadn't gone to screen and all that, she could have died from a very aggressive form of cervical cancer. And so I think the best way to really kind of end this is to talk about some of the, I guess, long-term implications, right? Because they say it as cutting, licking, whatever you want to call it. People have to live through these stories, right? And I think sometimes the wires get crossed. We don't really talk about just what people have to live through. So I guess maybe just walking us into this conversation about long-term complications, and I think linking into how best we can survive, we can support those who are, survivors.
Yeah. So it would be helpful to understand the long and short-term implications if I just kind of briefly walk through the types. Because each one is different from the other. So the type 1 or first type is what we call a clitoridectomy. Some people call it circumcision, specifically type 1. That's a partial or total removal of the clitoris, right? So the clitoris itself is actually pretty big. It goes right into the pelvis, but the smallest part of it, which is what we see on the outside, is being cut off or shaved, and that has implications for neurobiology. Type 2 is called excision. So that's when the clitoris and part of the labia minora, so the flesh on the inside part, are completely cut off. And then type 3 is infibulation. So that's when you do type 1 and type 2, and then you sew up the outer skin and completely cover the urethra. And then you only have a little part of the vaginal canal open. For those of you who might not know, there are 3 openings on the base of the female body. So the urethra, the vagina, and the anus. And so in type 3, you're covering the urethra completely, and then you have the vaginal canal only a little bit open. So when we think about long and short-term implications, they differ across the experiences, whether you experience type 1, type 2, or type 3. There's also a type 4, but that just covers everything from burning to stabbing to everything that doesn't fall under the other 3. So with short term, also if you can't see this, Mo's jaw is on the floor because it is a lot.
Sorry, my mouth is open because it's just like
I know, right? So with short term. Right. So with short-term complications, we're looking at shock, right? So shock, excessive pain, excessive bleeding, sepsis. So that's when infection sets in and then the body starts to destroy the tissues in response to that infection. There's complications with wound healing or genital tissue swelling, right? So those are just a few short-term consequences. Long-term, we have something called vaginismus, which is muscle spasms that happen in the vaginal canal that can make sex very painful. Even if it's consensual and you're there and you're fully present, your body still betrays you. There's PTSD because it's a traumatic experience. There's mistrust of family because in a lot of spaces it's your family that leads you into this. It's the women holding you down And most of the time, there's no anesthesia involved. So the women in your family that you love and trust, who you know love you, are holding you down to experience this. So mistrust, numbness in the vaginal area, memory loss has been reported, scarring and keloid formation, menstrual difficulties, like in the story I mentioned earlier, urinary symptoms, and infertility has happened too. So those are some of the things that have been recorded as long as short-term consequences. Now, actually connecting them to each type, that's a little hard to do. I'm yet to find, which long and short-term consequences are most likely connected to each type. So we just kind of group them all as long and short-term consequences of experiencing FGM.
Thank you, Jessica. It's so heavy, but I'm glad that with your work, we can at least address some of the cultural context and create more awareness. Yeah. And maybe change the narrative. And also, I think the voices of the survivors, because I think that's perhaps the most powerful source of change if we're to do away with this. Yeah. And I imagine that it's hard for them to come out and talk about it, because it's a lot to deal with, you know.
It is a lot. It's a lot, and you're asking them to rehash, to betray cultural and family traditions. You know, it is a lot, and to expose this very private experience that they're dealing with. It is a lot, and I absolutely just applaud the women that have been brave enough to come out and tell their stories, or even write their stories. Yeah.
I even imagine women who are currently going through a lot of these issues and didn't know, they can't even link it to circumcision because nobody ever told them. So they blame themselves for not, wanting to have sex with their husband because it's so painful, or not really enjoying sex, or so many things they're going through. Because your body always keeps a score. Your body will always remember, even if you don't remember.
You're familiar with the book,
I love the book, It's one of my Bibles,
Yes, yeah. So imagine women who experience that but live in the United States and don't have medical professionals who have an understanding of
cultural awareness
of that, the cultural awareness. So it makes it so much more difficult that you can't talk about it with your family because there's no acknowledgement there of how wrong this is, but also your medical care team cannot help you make those connections because they just don't know about it. They don't know the science behind it, and that's where my work comes in.
I mean, it's so true what you mentioned, because my friend said when she even confronted her parents about it, her dad was like, of course, he achieved that 𝗶𝗂𝗶𝗀. You were a virgin until marriage. It's like, duh, is that all is this all, this is what I was wanting you guys. But yeah, the layers, the problem is so multi-layered. But again, I'm hopeful that with the safe space you're providing, because your work, apart from just exploring the cultural issues, you're also developing, tips to address some of the psychological issues for survivors, which I'm really, really very hopeful about. And I cannot wait to have you in class, because guess what? I'm actually inviting Jessica to be one of my guest lecturers in my public health class. So I cannot wait for you to blow the minds of my...
We come to Oklahoma.
My Oki students who, this is going to be like a double cultural shock. I cannot wait to see their evaluation of me at the end of the year. I hope I don't distress a lot of their, tender sensibilities. But anyways, Jessica, this was really good. And we have to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
Maybe as a live event, and because you have so much wisdom, really so much wisdom. What maybe you really didn't know, but as you were talking, myself and I, they were just taking notes, sending it to one another, You're so wise and so passionate. And so, we thank you so much for sparring today. And I know we're going to have you back. It's a matter of when.
Thank you. That means a lot so much to me. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm really excited that you guys have this space to just explore a wide range of topics. I've listened to some of the other topics you talk about. I was like, wow, none of this is even close to FGM. This is completely different. So I love that there's this space for a wide range of topics.
Thank you.
So thank you.
The podcast, and again, Ayomide is glad that we're doing this together, because Ayomide was one of the people who helped get the podcast started. And I think you can get away with just... because the confusion comes when you have so many interests and you don't know how to define it. So when you talk about culture, you can fit anything underneath it. So we're glad to have you, and thanks for bursting our bubble, because this is a topic that I know will resonate with so many of our listeners, and especially the survivors, which I know a couple of them who listen to the show.
That's great. Yeah, please have them reach out to me if they just want someone to talk to, if they're looking for resources.
Yes. Speaking of which, how can they reach out to you? Yes.
Oh, that's a good question. So, so Mo actually made me get a Twitter. She doesn't even realize this, but when we talked, she was like, "You know that?
You could have led up with that testimony time." So Jessica is not. She has a very minimal social carbon footprint. I don't know how to do it.
LinkedIn. I was living under a rock and very happy under that rock. But I was also realizing, like, if you're going to connect with people, you maybe need to have at least one other one besides LinkedIn.
And you went on the angriest place on the universe, on the metaverse. I mean, they don't come for me. I mean, I still thinks I'm wrong when I think about Twitter as it's a very angry place. Maybe now that Elon Musk has, he can bring back all
flaws.
Also, I'm not even following this man. Why are there so many Elon Musk tweets? Like, it's always
he just bought Twitter. That's why $44 billion.
Right. Well, anyway, that's why I gotta come back.
Good. So what's your handle on Twitter? And then maybe like an email address people can reach you out on, just in case they're on Twitter.
On Twitter, I am at 𝗪𝗂𝗃𝗃, Jessie with a Y.
Okay.
𝗪𝗂𝗃𝗃, so Puri. You can always DM me, and I'm always happy to talk. You can find my email would be jessica.puri@northwestern.edu.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Thank you for sharing your time, your wisdom, your laughter, your sense of humor, your truth bombs, and your many uses of the word period.
I know.
She's allowed.
Side note, I have to say, like, one of my girlfriends was like, "Jess, I'm going to show you how often you say period," and she typed the certain word period in the search in our text, and it came up.
I mean, y'all will be culture, like culture. I wonder what my word is.
You and I mean, if you talk about cults a lot, you and I can, like, we can go on for a while. So we can
we have a cult episode that you might want to listen to. And
you should listen to that. I got almost drafted into a Korean cult.
What?
I left Nigeria and I almost going to the Korean version. See my life. I know. I'll send you the link. It's so he bringing his experience as a psychiatrist. He kind of talks about how we think that people that go into cult are foolish people. He talks about the circumstances that make you break down to like be part of cult, and I really like that episode as well.
Guys,
yeah. Anyways, thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Okay,
thank you for talking. Thank you for sharing.
And
see you again sometime soon.
Yes.
Right,
please come back again. We're gonna reach out to you. We really need to do maybe a live show on the suicide and depression in how do you say that word? Thank you. That's my no one. I can't be perfect. Those are the words that make me stumble. Yeah, those kind of words like in kids and how to build support. Thank you so much, Jessica.
All right, take care, guys.
All right,
bye.
This was the show. We are Medium. I'll catch you guys on another episode of the TheMoreSibylPodcast. Bye for now.
Bye.